Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's Writers Chat. This is where we all like to gather together as writers. We talk about things about writing, all things about writers, for writers, and by writers. So we're really glad to see you all here with us today. Welcome, welcome. And my name's Jean Wise. I'm one of the co-hosts, and I'm joined today by Bethany and Melissa. And I'm just going to say it again so it's on the recording. Melissa is our behind-the-scenes guru, and we are so appreciative of all that she does and stuff like that. So, Bethany, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our special guest and the topic today. I'm excited about this. Go ahead, Bethany.
I'm excited too, because we're talking about creativity, the School of Creative Thought with Lori Z. Scott. And she is so fun and so amazing. And I am going to read her bio because I just think it's fantastic. And I wouldn't be able to do it justice if I did it off the cuff. So, elementary school teacher Lori Z. Scott usually writes fiction because, like an atom, she makes up everything. Her downtime is filled with two quirky habits: chronic doodling and inventing lame jokes. Neither one impresses her principal, or friends, parents, dog, casual strangers, but they do help inspire her writing. Somehow, her odd musings led her to accidentally write a 10-title, best-selling chapter book series, and on purpose write over 150 short stories, articles, essays, poems, and devotions. In addition, Lori contributed to over a dozen books, mostly so she would have an excuse to give people for not folding her laundry. Hey, busy writing here. She has served as a speaker or workshop leader at several conferences and has visited local elementary schools to share her writing journey. Most days she's fully immersed in teaching, but most nights you can find her behind the keyboard. She could brag about winning the MOPS International Story Writing Contest or the Pockets Magazine Fiction Writing Contest or the North Carolina Christian Writers Conference Short Fiction Award, but that would be self-serving, which of course is totally beneath her. And then we can follow her on Instagram at lori.z.scott or check out her website at lori-z-scott.com, and I will put those links into our chat so that we'll have them. I think Lori is amazing. If you're following her on Instagram, you can watch the doodles that she's doing of chicken and goat and squirrel, and it's so fun the way she's doing this. And Lori, best-selling author, welcome.
Thank you so much, Bethany. I'd say, wow, thanks for that great introduction, but I wrote it myself. So
it's a great one.
I love your humor.
Well, we'll see.
That and just that is great.
Well, I got this idea. I'll say this for the recording. I teach, right? So I've been teaching for 20 years. And one of the things that we always have to do is we have to be trained on how to work with our gifted and talented students. And a lot of that has to do with training in creative thought. And so after doing it for so many years, I'm like, you know what? This isn't good teaching just for creative kids. It's good teaching for any kid, and anyone can do it, you know? And so I started doing these things with my students, and it's amazing what they can do. And I started thinking, well, why don't I adopt some of those things as an author? I mean, creative thought, that's how it works. So I created a PowerPoint to go with this. And Melissa, with your permission, if I could share my screen.
Sure, just a second here.
And that'll just help keep me on track, because I have a tendency as a teacher to kind of go off on all these tangents, and before you know it, I'm telling dad jokes, and it's just not a good thing. So I do have a share screen. Oops, that's a chat button. Share screen button on me. So if I just click here.
Now try it now. See if it
I'm
works.
going to do it.
There we
Does
go.
it show up?
Yes,
Yes.
it does.
Ooh, okay. So I just need to go to present, and that's going to be there. And slideshow from beginning. Yay. Okay, that's a much better picture of me because I was younger. But that's the information that Bethany was talking about. And as far as writing goes, just a little bit of background. I guess I could go to that. I just enjoyed writing and started writing when I was pregnant with my kids. I took a hiatus from teaching. I went to the Write to Publish conference and learned a whole bunch. And that's where I found the publisher for my Megan Rose series. And sometimes still, this is really weird because they've been out of print for a while. Sometimes still on Instagram, I'll have someone say, oh, that was really great. One of the girls I'm working with was like, I read your books when I was a kid. It's like, okay, so I'm a little bit older. But all right, so I'm going to talk about 3 methods today, and I'm kind of hoping that you guys have a piece of paper or something handy, because just the way teaching works is you give the concept, you model it, and then you try it. And that's how you kind of submit how these things work. Because it's one thing to imagine, oh yeah, that would work. But when you actually try it, your brain works in a different way and things start clicking. You're like, oh, and you actually understand what's happening between the synapses in your brain and how it's firing. So the first method I'm going to talk about is called F2OE, because of course, as teachers, we have to have an acronym for just about everything. And it stands for fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaborate. Now, there's not a lot of details on that screen I gave you, just a little bit to show you what it means by fluency and flexibility and originality and elaborate. And I don't need to read that to you. That's going to be on there. But it goes along with the idea that one way to be creative is to generate a lot of ideas. I mean, if you think about it, so if I go out and I buy 1 lottery ticket, I might win and yay for me. But if I buy a ton of lottery tickets, then I have a better chance of coming up with at least some form of winnings, right? So it's the same thing with ideas. The more you generate, the more likely you are to dig deeper and deeper and deeper and find that idea that actually, my dog is growling at me. Apparently she disagrees. But you're more likely to find that idea that's going to work. So here's an example that I worked out. I think I might have put it on the next page. If I was thinking ahead, I did. I don't always. There I did. Okay. So I thought, well, today's election day. I'm wearing blue. Yay. So here's an example, just the way I think through it. I start with fluency. It's election day. I'm going to think through some things that have to do with the election. So I came up with polls, candidate, vote, office, Democrat, Republican, ads, promises, lines, opposition, truth, lies, lines, the polling lines, debate, choice. I want to come up with at least 12 ideas, sometimes more. And then you take those ideas and you move to the next step, which is flexibility. So you look at those ideas and think about how they're related. And how would I categorize these things if I had to do that? And what's happening inside your brain when you start doing the categorization, sorry, that word came out just like it was like 10 syllables long, but when you start doing the categorizing of the list, there's ideas that start popping up. So as I group them into my different lists, I actually put down here what I grouped them into. So I had candidate, Democrat, Republican grouped together. And as I was making that list, democracy popped to mind. So I added that to my list. I did lines, polls, vote, and then electoral college came to mind. So those kinds of things I popped in and added to my list. So that's the second step. Then you take that information and you look at it a little bit more and you think, okay, I need to come up with something else that's going to fit, but I want it to be original, so a little bit different. So here's an easy out. What if there's a third candidate? So what is that third candidate going to look like? Now, if you're me, it's probably going to look like a squirrel dressed in red, white, and blue with a sparkler in its hand. But for someone that's writing a fiction story, hey, you have the reins to make any candidate you want. If you're writing fiction, what if there's a third candidate? And then you get to the elaborate, and that's the details. That's where you go in and you say, okay, I'm going to add details to this. I'm going to say what they would look like, say where they come from. So you're giving the backstory of the character. Now, that makes sense when you hear it. I'm sure it does, right? You're like, yeah.
And I think the question, what if?
So let's try it. Let's try it now.
Yeah.
Okay.
What if it's so powerful? Yeah.
I know. What is if is powerful. And you'll see a lot of the techniques incorporate that kind of thinking into it. And a lot of the techniques in the very first one I just showed you well, I don't want to give too much away, but they keep coming up. But you guys ready to try it? Like if I could give you a topic? All right. So let's do the topic of breakfast.
Ooh.
All right. So on your piece of paper, I'm going to do this too. Sorry, just kind of off. Here we go. I'm going to give you a minute or so. Oh, this is the other thing. Giving yourself a time limit. That puts a different kind of pressure on your brain and the way it thinks and forces it to generate those ideas. So I'm going to set my timer for a minute, and I'm going to see how many words you can come up related to breakfast. Ready, go. And of course, we have that awkward silence.
That's all right. That's all right.
We're all thinking about breakfast. Oh, you're making breakfast. Good job. My daughter's making breakfast.
You could sing, do the Jeopardy tune.
Have you seen me or heard me sing? I sound like a dead cow that's been run over 3 times by a car. Okay, you got 15 seconds. Actually, I'm making that up because I couldn't get my phone on. It's okay. 3, 2, 1, stop. Okay. Now, my guess is when you first started writing, bam, 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 you had a bunch of ideas that came to mind right away. And then you probably hit a wall and you started thinking of the same things over and over again. And you had to push your brain a little bit. Is that true?
That happened to me.
Yeah.
I really rabbit trailed.
That's okay. All right. Well, that's the first step, is making the list. And my daughter, who is out here making breakfast, walked by with an avocado. I probably would not have had that on my first list. So think about how you're going to categorize your list. You might have like hot foods and cold foods. You might want to categorize yours by things that are healthy, things that are not healthy. I'm going to let you decide, but I want you to categorize your list. If another word occurs to you while you're making the categories, add it to your list. Okay? All right, so take a moment to do that. Okay, so quick question. How many of you came up with additional words to add? Good, I see at least Melissa did. Jean Wise is like, no.
I didn't.
Jean Wise, if you look at some of your words and think about, and your categories, and think about, well, what might go with that, like salt or pepper, or right? So even utensils or plates that might go with it. Those could be some things that you add because they're all related to something at breakfast, right?
And it looks like in the chat, everybody came up with additional words or other ideas.
Good.
Yeah.
And it's surprising though, because sometimes it's like, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that? I did this with spy tools, and actually I wanted to share that and I ended up sharing election day instead, but I did it with spy tools and I listed a bunch of tools right away, and then all of a sudden I was like, I don't know what else a spy would need. But you think about like the author of Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond things. I mean, he had like, I actually have a list of some of his things. He had a, let's see. He had spike umbrellas, lipstick gas, an x-ray desk, grappling suspenders. I mean, come on.
Wow.
All right, so now we go to originality.
Yeah.
So think about your list, look at your list, and think of ways that you can combine things or change them in some way to make an original dish. And that might take you a little bit of time. And then elaborate on the details. So for example, if you came up with a bacon sprinkled donut, then you would elaborate on the details. Like the filling might be cream cheese and the outside would be a pastry, and I'm making this up on the spot, and I cook as well as I sing, so and bacon flavored frosting. And so we won't go too much into that, but you can see, you think, well, okay, well, that's a little exercise. That's not a whole story. But how many times in your story are you thinking along? You've got the typical, normal, everyday plot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So plant those seeds when you're writing your story and think, what is it that I can plant in here that might take it a different direction or give it a different feel, or anything. So anyway, that's the F2OE method, which is kind of cool, isn't it?
It is very cool. Very cool. It's something I think we could take with us easily.
Well, I hope so. Okay, so that's the first method, and you can ask me more about that later. I'm not even looking at the time, so I might have already talked for
You're all right.
5 minutes.
No, you're all right. You got
all right, so the next one, this is a classroom standard. And you've heard it before. I know you have. It's called brainstorming. By the way, down at the bottom of that screen are just some of the little squirrels that I throw up on my Instagram. And most of the time, I just kind of drew a picture and didn't have any idea what I was going to pair with it. And the ideas just came, because that's what happens when you're brainstorming things. The things just kind of come. So it's a method that was developed by a man named Alex Osborne. And it works pretty simple. You come up with a topic, and then just like you did with F2OE, you brainstorm as many words as you can related to the topic. And then with that list, you sort them and look at different combinations. Now you might be thinking, well, this is the exact same method. How could I apply it differently? I don't use F2OE when I write poetry. I use brainstorming when I write poetry. And you would be amazed, almost all the poems that I write start with some type of brainstorming list. So I did this the other day. There was a poetry contest years ago that was on fall. I forget what it was. I've long lost the poem that it won, the poem did. But I just came up with a list of topics, right? All things that have to do with fall. And what I do is, once I have that list, I look through for words with certain connotations. Not the literal meaning of the word, but the feeling behind the word. So I could say that the air is turning chilly, or it cools, or I could say a cooler breeze. I mean, you know what I mean? Different kinds of words give a different feel. The leaves are yellow, or the leaves are golden. One has a much richer feel to it. The tree is barren. The tree is. So if you look at that list right there, and I went through, also with poetry, I look for words that have alliteration. So when I group these words up, I might put like feathers and fall together, because they both have that f sound. And look for rhyming words, because you can have internal rhyme within a line. So this is a poem that I wrote thinking about what we were studying at the time, which was butterflies in the classroom. That's why you got migration on there. And I want you to listen to it and see how the words that I chose give the mood. So it goes, and I don't have it posted, I'm sorry. The monarch with her stained glass wings alights as mournful crickets sing. She lets her gentle spirit grieve the fading of once vibrant leaves. She weeps for all the beauty lost to icy kiss of morning frost. Alone her tender tears release, an ode to flocks of feathered geese. Yet still, like dying seeds air-led, she seeks a cozy winter bed. Once more she flees from fall's last breath and dreams beyond its quiet death. Right? So in that poem, you have a very strong sense of the dying of the season, and the passage of time. And I write a lot of humor. So a lot of times when I do my writing, I do it a little bit differently. There's one
I
more I
think
want to share with you.
the unusual combinations would lead to
Yeah.
on that. Bethany asked if I use mind mapping, and I have used a lot of mind mapping, but I think sometimes that leads to linear ideas, which would work for this brainstorming, but doesn't always work for these unusual, almost quirky, funny combos, unless you allow yourself to purposely move them. I don't know if you could do anything with that or not, but.
Okay, so speaking of which, I'm gonna, my internet is so slow. I'm trying to pull up it says, sorry. I was gonna give you an example of one of the quirkier ones that you can use this to do, because if you use one word prompt challenges, they give you words. So if the word is tiny, that's the one I was trying to pull up. We'll see. If it pulls up later, I'll show it to you. But just using different combinations and fun things like that. There's an author named Nancy I. Sanders, and she and I have done a number of emails and interactions, and we just did a promotion together for some of her books. And that was the book launch thing that Kyle was talking about last night. And he said, don't do those. I was helping with that. But she does word walls. She actually has a notebook, and she draws, like for her Jane Austen for kids, she drew teacups, and she put her brainstorm ideas on that, which I thought was wonderful, because it also involves a little bit of artwork, and there's something that happens in your brain, and research shows this, when you have images paired with words. There's a different kind of a way that creativity is drawn out. So anytime you compare that image with the words, you're going to have a stronger, deeper kind of connection.
Good tip.
Yeah.
Good tip.
All right. I guess I should ask if there's any questions before I go on to tip number 3.
We've been watching the chat, and I think people enjoyed having the practice of doing that,
Yeah. Well, I did have a practice. Let me see for that one. Let's see if I put it in here. Who knows? Oh, yeah, I did. Okay.
Hey.
And by the way, you can, I said to use it for poetry, but you can also use it in books. I belong to a critique group, and a lot of times in the critique group, they'll read their different passages, and I'm just looking for the connotation of the words that they're using. And you'll point out, hey, this person is angry, so you use, crimson instead of red, or just something like that, right? Okay, so name a mood, any mood.
Elation.
Okay, so let's take a minute and brainstorm as many words as you can think of that give you the feeling of elation. You come up with 502. Also, I'll see if my poem comes up. Okay, was it hard?
Well, I did the same thing as the last time. I started off good and then hit the wall. So
Okay, well, do you have one in particular that you would use if you had like an over-the-top kind of elation? Do you have a word that fits that?
I pulled a thesaurus and went jubilation.
Jubilation works. Okay, then do you have a word that is more of a, yeah, I'm really happy kind of elation? It's more of an inner kind of feeling?
Excitement, bliss.
Yeah, bliss, see? So even though they mean the same thing, there's a totally different feel between jubilation and bliss. And you can see it in a character. One that's really extroverted and outgoing is going to be jubilant and in your face. And the other one who's a little bit more introverted will just be bliss. Yeah. So sweet. Yeah. So that's how you can use that. And then I did get my internet to pull up if you wanted to hear.
Yeah, Lori, just real quick, I think Brandy made up a really neat word.
Okay.
Fantabulous. Fantabulous. I love it.
Oh, I love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
making up words is good too. It's like
Yeah.
it's not a word, but it should be. So I'm going to use it anyway. Dr.
Yeah.
Seuss says that all the time, and everyone
And
loves Dr. Seuss.
there you go. Read your poem.
Okay, here it is. This is maybe not the best one, but it works with the brainstorming idea. It's called small favor because the word was small. Hey, I need a minor favor, just a tiny little wish. It's an itsy bitty favor. Wave your wand, the smallest switch. Sorry. I'm asking because I know you. Well, a teensy weensy bit. I mean, you know my name now, and you hugged me. That's legit. So the microscopic favor, please don't say no. No, not yet. Can we buy a marsosaurus and then keep it for a pet?
Oh,
Now that's a very large dinosaur. So
that
anyway.
is
But
wonderful.
it's just, again, that's coming up with how many different words can I think of and then working it in
And that almost did sound like a Dr. Seuss.
there. Anyway, so it's a great technique to use, and I really recommend it if you're ever going to write poetry, and I also recommend it if you're in a particular, especially high intensity chapter of your book, and you want to make sure it has just the right feel. The word list is great. So, and I count that as creative. That is creative thought.
It's creative.
All right. Now this last technique is used in the classroom. It is a lot more complex. And honestly, I use it for writing children's books. And you might see why after I kind of talk about it. Once again, it's an acronym because we're teachers, which means we're going to come up with some kind of gimmick to help you remember. But it's called SCAMPER. And you can see from the screen what each of those letters stands for. But here's how you think about them. So substitute, you are thinking about, can I replace or change any part of the story? That is classical when you have a fairy tale that's been retold.
Yeah.
And how many books do we have like that on the market? So can you replace or change any part of the story, the characters, or the setting? I'm actually cheating and looking at my sheet here. You can also think, oh, here's another one. What about changing the rules of the society or the way magic works? There you go, Rhonda, because you kind of have that kind of thing. Or the time period.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever Knight and King Authors Court, that Connecticut.
Yeah.
I forget the title. You'll have to help me with that. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Combine is blending two ideas together. So what if you combine one story like Hannibal Lecter with Sherlock Holmes, right?
Ooh.
Interesting little combination. So that's the combined aspect. Adapt. So you don't necessarily have to do all these things. You can choose like a single letter and do it. Adapt is there something similar to this that can just be put in a different context? Like you might take the story of the Three Little Pigs and put that story not in the countryside, but perhaps it's in a big metropolis or on a different planet, right? Okay, modify, magnify, and minify. So what if something is made larger or it's made smaller? I love that idea, right? I keep saying right. I don't know why. My blood sugar sometimes when it gets low, I get repetitive.
I like it, but I like that. I a lot of times call it zoom out and then zoom in.
Yes. Okay. So it's probably something that has been, I mean, nothing new under the sun, right? Just different takes on different methods. You could also think about giving creatures different features. You see a lot of this like in anime. They'll have creatures that look a certain way, or even, dare I say it, Star Wars or Star Trek. Some of the creatures out there, they have certain powers. Or you can make something heavier or lighter. Like what if Jack was the giant and the giant was Jack size? That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
P, put to other uses. And this is what Ian Fleming does when he writes his James Bond characters. What are some items there that can be put to other uses, like the lipstick gas?
Oh, okay.
Eliminate. Oh, like a dragon for a furnace. That would be fun. Have buildings with dragons for furnaces. A lot of children's books do that, where they have Yeah, it's fun. Eliminate is to simply take away a character. Like, what if it was the three little bears, except for Papa Bear wasn't there? There's a single Mama Bear. Would Goldilocks and the three bears be a little bit different if that were the case? And then R, reverse rearrange. It just works the way it sounds. You just turn the idea around. And so what happens if your hero is actually the villain and your villain is actually the hero? Interesting enough, a television show that my son had watched and told me about, I watched just a few episodes of it, was called Lucifer.
Yeah.
And in that, they twisted around where he is actually the good guy. And I know, it's just kind of weird.
Screw tape letters, yes.
Yeah, the screw tape letters. Yes. Oh, I love those by C.S.
Yeah,
Lewis.
and that was really almost hard to read because you read
I was just going to say the same thing. It was so hard for me to read.
It's hard for me to get into the person to read it the opposite, to know what the devil is teaching the young devil. On that.
Now, here's a little interesting thing about C.S. Lewis, actually. I used to work in the Wade Center, which is in Wheaton College, and that's where a lot of C.S. Lewis's works were stored. And in some of his wardrobe is stored there, too. I used to give tours of his wardrobe. But one of the things he said was the screw tape letters was really, really difficult for him to write because he had to put his mind in the mindset of the villain. And it was so hard for him to do.
So hard. But if we got to put this plug in, if anybody ever goes to write to publish and go to Wheaton College for any reason, you've got to go into that center. And you see C.S. Lewis's desk and the wardrobe.
Yes.
And
they have Dorothy Sayers, J.R.R. Tolkien, G.K. Chesterton. There's like 7 different authors there.
It is really a cool thing. Now, Lori, I was thinking about this because you a lot of your examples are poetry and children's books and some fiction. But I'm finding I'm a nonfiction writer and my mind's going because sometimes you have a very complex topic that you want to explain in different ways. I think all these techniques you're sharing with us can do that to expand a chapter and maybe clarify an issue, and might just come up with just the right image that might help the reader be transformed.
And I love that. It's just looking at life a little bit different, and it doesn't have to be a sit-down thing. It can be a regular thing. And I need to explain that a little bit. This is a little spontaneity here. But one of the most creative things I think you can do is play with words and puns and multi-meanings. So all the time this happens to me, we'll be sitting in a conversation and people will be talking and saying things, and my mind is just thinking about all the puns that you can make out of this word or that word or the other. Every once in a while, I let one of those slide out and they go over most people. But inside, I'm just kind of chuckling and going, ha, 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 ha. But it's the mindset of not just taking the word at its face value, but playing with it. And when you can play with things, I think it brings out the creativity in all of us.
And as writers, we play with words. What words you would? I love playing with words. I could spend more time on that than doing the actual writing sometimes.
Well, and you can take any of these methods and use them with fidelity and develop a mindset of thinking at and looking at things creatively. You can.
Yeah.
So
we're getting some sharing in the chat, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, no, hey, how about if I get out of this?
Okay.
Okay, well, there we go. What surprised you? What did you learn? What are you wondering now? That's what we're going to talk about. Sorry, that was one of my little critters that just kind of developed. Oh, before I take this away and stop sharing my screen.
Yeah.
This. There's so many things I've done this year that I was like, well, I'll just try it. They could say no. Like this chat, for example, I'm just like, well, I'll just ask. They say no, I haven't lost anything. I'll just throw it out there. See what happens.
Talk to us about these drawings. You put those on Instagram, you said?
Well, you have to give a little bit of credit to Miss Bethany there, because I'm serious, because I actually signed up for a consultation with her, and she looked at my Instagram feed, and being the amazing and very giving person that she is. She gave me some feedback like, hey, maybe you should focus on this, and look what's popular. And what I discovered is I got a lot more responses to my Instagram feed, to my little doodles I put up. I am not a trained artist. I'm not.
Great.
But I like to doodle. And it's just something I sit down and watch TV and doodle a bunch of pictures. And sometimes my doodles have something important to say.
Oh.
Most of the time they're just silly.
No.
But she said, Bethany said to me, because I wrote a book proposal for a book called The Grumpy Little Goat. And she said, well, I'm like, well, I don't have any books out there right now. They're all out of print. I don't even know what I promote. And she's like, well, just start talking about some of the things. And she said, do a goat. So that's where the goat came from.
Well, I have to give you credit because Lori's really taken that idea and run with it. So if you look at her Instagram feed, you can scroll back through and see how she's taking things that are happening in the world and kind of making them into these things. But then also recently you had this story that was trailed throughout. So you wouldn't get the whole story every day, but every other day or maybe every day, I'm not sure. It was like little pieces of it. So you're kind of reading this children's book on her Instagram day by day. It was very interesting, very entertaining, and I just think you're doing a really, really great job with it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it's creative.
That's great. But it's just, and it's another thing, Cody Moorhead has said, find a brand. So I'm like, well, I don't have a brand now because my books are out of print, but I'm distractible and I'm a little nutty. So the squirrel. And that squirrel, now I have people on Instagram send me squirrel videos. They're just like, oh, I thought of you. I'm like, oh, yay. Thank you for that. That's exciting. I don't have a squirrel book out. When is the squirrel book coming out? They say, when is that squirrel book coming out? I'm like, I don't know. We'll see.
You can make, here's an idea. I'm picturing pad notebook paper with the little squirrel character at the top. You can sell those, Lori.
But I'm saying though, my point of all this is, it's not that I'm creative. I'm not any more creative than the average person. It's just that most people don't think they are, so they don't try.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised at how creative you can be when you actually try. And the other thing is to build off of somebody else's ideas. You know, I mean, Bethany kind of said it a second ago. She said, well, I gave the idea. I built off her idea. Mm-hmm. That wasn't my idea. I didn't come up with that brilliant idea to put the goat out there. That was her brilliant idea. But I built on it. And that's what we do when we're creative. So reading lots of books and looking for those kinds of ideas, and especially pulling out like words or phrases that are really intriguing. There's some amazing authors out there that write these phrases that are just like, how did they come up with it? And if you can study it, then you can own it.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to, we've talked here before about having mentor texts, having a certain books that we want to write like this author. And what we really do need to do is take one of those books and really almost dissect it and see how they put their thoughts together, how they built the scene, how they added depth to that character, how did they spin the phrases, and I think that would give us ideas for, I'm pulling up my little sheet of paper here I took notes on today, to then apply them, the techniques you add, to our own voice.
I would love to hear what some of the people came up with for their...
Yeah, why don't we invite everybody back in, because we've got about 15 minutes here. The two comments I was going to pull out of the chat was that Rhonda talks about her heroine in her new contemporary romance is a sort of a Cinderella, but she rejects the glamorous makeover, which I thought was really clever. And Melissa said her story is a roundabout another take of Robin Hood. And I think really that is so true. And I haven't read the latest ones here, on that. What did you learn from Gary V? Bethany, I see it sort of mentioned.
Yeah, so he was talking about fiction. I don't know if it was necessarily children's, but creating the brand around the character. Like if he was going to write a novel or something, I don't remember what interview it was or where I read it from him, but he was saying he would create this world around that person and get people invested in the character. as part of the marketing that he would do. And so that was where the idea came from for her. Like, okay, if you've got this book, why not get people to fall in love with those characters? And since you can draw them, it's even better.
Yeah, and stuff. Comments to anybody? A comment about what helps you become creative, or you want to pick Lori's brain? Anybody got a quick question?
I can also give an example of Scamper. I didn't give that model.
Yeah, let's look at that.
Was there anybody else that had a comment?
I would just say I love the idea of reverse, the R in Scamper, because that's where I find people will go, oh, when they're struck by something, when you take a stereotype and turn it on its head, that's what got me thinking about my heroine. And I did a real detailed character sketch, and I started describing the stereotypical romantic heroine. And I'm like, I don't like this, because that's not what I want her to be. I want her to be quirky. Quirky is much more interesting than the stereotype. And so since I'm quirky, it kind of all works out.
I love
Quirks are always good.
Quirks are good. And reverse is still a good example. The Scamper, give us a couple ideas of Scamper. What you got?
I had a couple. So my recommendation when you're first using it is to, let's see if I've got an example here, is to kind of start with something simple like a children's book and turn it on its head. So I looked at Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Mm-hmm. So substitute. I actually did this and wrote a children's story with it, which is not going to see the light of day simply because it's ridiculous and for me. So, but substitute. So an astronaut and three robots instead of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? So the porridge, instead of a porridge, you have a battery charger. So combine, the three robots are related somehow to the Tin Men on the Wizard of Oz. So they often rest up and are prone to singing show tunes. And their knees knock whenever they see a broomstick. So those are the robots. They also, to combine, they will use the yellow lights to follow the path through the spaceship. Adapt, the astronaut perhaps is a secret rebel. Magnify, minify, modify. The three robots have the ability to link together and change their appearance. P, put to other uses. The charging station can also electrocute nosy astronauts. And since it's combined with the Wizard of Oz, it can also fry witches. Ooh. And then eliminate, well, there's no daddy robot. Sorry, buddy. So, I mean, it's just kind of fun, the different ways you can go with that. So
that is
somehow I ended up including in the story an evil Darth Vader type commander who had a very bad sense of humor.
Well, your comment about you wrote that and it will never see the light of day, I think that's interesting as writers, because there is a certain degree of what we write isn't ever going to be published. We know that.
Yeah.
That it's for our own enjoyment, our own creativity. Often that's like morning pages are to get us going in writing on that.
And you never know what it might spur off that could eventually become publishable.
That's right.
And it's really exciting to see kids go through this too, because when kids start doing this, they bounce off of each other, and then they get, well, in the classroom anyway, they get louder and louder and louder and louder, and like, oh, we can do this, we can do this. It's like, yes, you can do whatever you want. I don't care what you do. It sounds good. Write it out, go write that. I mean, that's because they get so excited.
Yes. But that says something about community and bouncing that off somebody. And we didn't, most of what we've done here, we did on our own, but to do that in a community, in a writer's group would be invaluable, I would think. Maybe that's something as writers we need to remember on that.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. To do it as a group. Okay. Questions? Anything else? We can wrap up here if we've got any other questions or comments? I'll just share one thing I read a long time ago, because it's getting a little dated now because we don't have phone books in the house. But I had an English class where they handed out the phone book and had us look at the top. You know how they did them in alphabetical order? So they'd have the two words at the top, the word that started and the word that ended the page. You know what I'm saying? In alphabetical order. And it put weird combinations. It was using the scamper, the C in scamper, it added 2 words together, alliteration usually, you know, lingering lingerie, and that probably isn't a good example, but you see what I'm saying? It had, you know, it would have 2 hyphenated words that would give you an idea of creativity on that. But we don't have phone books anymore, so we'll have to come up with something else. I don't know. Maybe dictionaries. Maybe we could pull out a dictionary or something and do that and stuff. Okay, anything else? Stephanie, you got anything finalized or something you want to announce while we're still on recording?
Just remember that NaNoWriMo is happening right now, and Hope still has that 50,000 word class, which I'm excited to take. So we can put those links in there. But I'm sure people will talk about Nano in the after party too. So I'm excited to hear people's updates. So cheering everybody on, even if we're not participating.
Yay, love it. I love it. And next week, Melissa, do you want to talk about next week?
Next week, we are going to hear from Scott Rutherford about multi-layered conflict in fiction.
Okay.
I hate to say this, but I got a problem with that. Sorry, bad pun. I had to let it slip out. Multi-layered conflict.
Yeah, we've got it. So that'll be very interesting in that way. And I'll miss seeing everybody next week. We'll be out of town next week, so we'll be able to see each other. But we'll catch you up in 2 weeks and stuff like that. Okay, and we'll wrap up the recording. We'll invite you all to stay on, and we'll do a little sharing and celebrating. And I want to thank you, Lori. I did take notes, and I think I'm going to transfer a couple of these things onto like a little sticky note. Got my sticky note ready to go, and keep it right up here on my desk on that for the next time I need to do it. There's Scamper and F2OE. What was that? F2OE for sure on that way. So we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you for taking the time for being here with us today or watching us on the replay. Again, thank you, Lori. This was stimulating and fun and hands-on, and I love that kind of stuff on that. And we'll see you all next week on Writers Chat. Bye, everybody.